All right, we'll call to order the City Council special meeting agenda for Monday, June the 24th, 2024 at 4:00 p.m. Madam Secretary, roll call and certification of quorum. I'll certify we have a quorum present as all members of the council are present. Thank you for each and every one of you for being here. Moving forward to citizens' comments, did we receive any? All right, so we'll move to new business, council input and discussion regarding the capital improvement program. With that, Trent?
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Council. This is one of many steps in our overall budget process, but it's a significant step as this drives our capital improvement program drives our debt service rate, as well as our water and sewer user rates. So tonight we're going to be covering some of the ongoing projects, new projects scheduled to start in fiscal year 25, and then early previews of our rate models for both the debt service tax rate and the water and sewer rates. Input and changes that we make on the CIP now, or as part of what's approved for the FY25 budget, will make impacts on those tax rates and water and sewer rates in FY26. So just want to make that distinction as to where we can pull the lever tonight and what that does change. We have the presentation broken into two sections tonight: the general fund and then the enterprise fund, as those don't impact each other, so we can talk about each of those and how they impact those different rates as well. So we're going to have the presentation going through the projects. Is going to be our Director of Engineering and Public Works, Mr. Lorenzo Wingate, and then our Budget Officer, Ms. Rachel Winslow, will cover the budget and finance pieces. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Lorenzo.
Real quick, we didn't discuss this earlier. I meant to ask you: do we want to not take a break, but break for questions? One on the regular, I call it just the regular side, and then the other one on the...
Yes, so we've got a break at the end of the general fund presentation for questions, and then again for the enterprise fund. And then I'll point out, really before we get kicked off, is that we have made a few tweaks for clarity on the presentation since what was in your packet, put in your packet Friday. So hopefully that'll clarify a few things in there as we work through the presentation tonight. Okay. So with that, I'll hand it off to Mr. Wingate. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This evening, kind of as Trent talked about, we'll provide updates on both the ongoing and future CIP projects within the city's capital improvement program. And the presentation will begin with the discussion of the projects that are funded by the general fund. So there are several drainage projects that are currently in the design phase. Many of the projects will consist of regrading roadside ditches and replacing undersized driveway culverts. Brooklyn Acres, Garden Road, O'Day Road, and Woody Road drainage projects will be reimbursed as part of a grant program through the General Land Office. So you should have a $2.9 million construction contract for these projects on this evening's council agenda for consideration. Also, the Hickory Creek, Garden Acres, and Harridge Miller projects are also to be reimbursed as part of the General Land Office funds. In the amount of $1.2 million. We also have the Longwood Park Drainage Improvement Project that's expected to be kicked off next week for design phase. And the Hickory Slough Regional Detention Pond Project is a partnership project with Brazoria County Drainage District number 4, which is still currently under construction, with the drainage district still moving spoil materials out of that pond site. The facilities projects that are currently in design phase include the addition of a fuel island at Reflection Bay Water Reclamation Facility, which is intended to better serve the personnel on the west side of Highway 288. The expansion of the Orange Street Service Center will be accomplished sequentially with Phase 2 of the Hill House Road Annex project. The latest Thursday packet that you guys received provided an update on the Hill House Road Annex project, which will be is intended to be awarded or expected to be awarded on July 8th, which is approximately, if awarded, about 16% below the $22.4 million of available construction budget. There are also a number of fiber projects in construction which extend the city's fiber network to facilities, some of the traffic cabinets at some of the intersections, and also to a number of the utility infrastructure, such as the lift stations and those types of locations. Hickory Slough Sportsplex Phase 2 project will provide 6 additional fields within phase 2 of the Hickory Slough Detention Pond project. So the intention expectation is to combine the detention project and this parks project into one big project. The parks component, which is $17.3 million, is intended to be funded by PEDC, or Pearland Economic Development Corporation. So Streets has several projects that are in design phase, and the Smith Ranch Road Extension and McCower Road widening projects have an 80-20 cost share agreement with TxDOT through the HGAC, or Houston Galveston Area Council's Transportation Improvement Program. These two projects have a total combined cost of more than $70 million. So we'll get an 80-20 split on a good portion of those two projects. The bids for the Sidewalk and Gaps Project Replacement Program are expected to be opened in early August. This program, the Sidewalk Gaps and Replacement Program, is intended to have $2 million allocated within this year's budget, and the next 3 years, we expect to have $4 million to allocate towards repair and installation of gaps in those fiscal years coming. So projects completed in the FY24 calendar year include Willow Crest Drainage Subdivision Improvement Project, and a few improvements at the Public Safety Complex, which include the new training facility and some renovations within the building. And there's our PCI index, or road network condition assessment, was completed, and we use the data from that PCI information to identify new street projects that we would do prepare in the future. Future operations and maintenance costs associated with some of the recently completed projects are really expected to be minimal. FY25, you see very little O&M costs, primarily because we have existing infrastructure. It doesn't really add much to what we're doing to maintain those systems. And so going forward, if there's no O&M costs, that's the reason why. So projects planned to begin in FY25 include intersection improvements at Pearland Parkway and Berry Rose, the continuation of that sidewalk gap and replacement program that I mentioned earlier, and phase 2 of Independence Park, which is intended to allow for us to amenitize the existing pond and add some other park improvements throughout that Independence Park. So projects slated to start construction in FY25 really is a continuation of the design efforts completed in 2024, and they include a number of drainage improvement projects within various subdivisions. Longwood Park, I think everybody's familiar with. We've had a few comments here in council from a few of the residents, so that project will be under construction, expected to be under construction in 2025. And at this point, I'll pass the presentation back to Rachel to discuss how the CIP impacts property taxes.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So next we're going to look at the property tax impact for the proposed capital improvement plan and the future impacts. In September 2023, this was the forecasted impact of the fiscal year 24 capital improvement plan, including our proposed fiscal year 24 debt service rate. As you can see, it increased to 36 cents at the highest point. The current tax rate forecast for the capital improvement plan includes our adopted debt service rate of 32 cents and shows that there's no forecasted rate increase with the proposed CIP. And the debt service rate is projected to decrease starting in fiscal year 2028. This is an almost 4-cent decrease from the high and the prior forecast. And not included in any projections are future bond elections. Those projects are considered unfunded until an election takes place and is approved. This slide indicates the proposed future debt, assuming no future bond election, and these amounts are all backed by property taxes. So it includes our certificates of obligation and the previously approved voter bonds. Debt sold in 2025 will impact the fiscal year 2026 debt service rate, and increasing or decreasing projects slated to be sold in fiscal year 25 will only impact future rates. These next slides give an overview of projects slated to start in fiscal year 2025 or later by project type. Capital costs include costs to award contracts and reflect the work to be done by fiscal year. This chart does include, potential future bond projects. Proposed funding for the projects on the prior chart for larger projects that take more than 1 year funding or construction funding will occur over a number of years to match the construction timeline and save on the debt rate. Proposed drainage projects to start in fiscal year 2025 or later. Most are approved as part of the 2023 voter-approved bond package. And funding sources for drainage projects include voter-approved GO bonds, GLO funds, and other grant funds, as well as certificates of obligation as needed and within the city's policy. Next on our list, we have proposed facility projects that are beginning in 2025 or later. Funding sources for facility projects include certificates of obligation, GO bonds, and occasionally are shared with water sewer COs as they serve both functions. The proposed parks projects to begin in 2025 or later include the Independence Park Phase 2 and the Parks Master Plan update, which will be cash funded, as well as additional Clear Creek Trail segments, which will be split between grant funds and city contribution. Proposed street projects with an asterisk shown here are potential future bond projects. These are not approved at this time and are considered unfunded until such a time as a bond election is called and approved, and they are here only as a preliminary forecast of potential projects in the future. At this time, we'll pause and take questions, or I'll turn it back over to Mr. Epperson to take questions on the general fund.
To you and Council Mayor, if there's.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you for the presentation for both of you. We'll turn it over to council for questions, comments, and we'll contain our questions for this portion of what we've had up till date, and then we'll get into the enterprise fund and all of that here in just a minute. So open it up for questions. Mr. Koza, kick us off.
Thank you, Mayor. Just some housekeeping inquiries. I don't know, Trent, you're probably better, or Lorenzo, either one. On the Willowcrest subdivision, we've had some drainage issues or ponding, whatever you want to call it, with water being held. Have we been able to address those and get that?
Sure. So I'll kick it over to Lorenzo, but we have made significant progress on that. There was some rework. That was all at the contractor's cost. I believe there's still some of that left, and maybe Lorenzo can give us an update.
Yes, sir. So I know there was one section, we had an inquiry from a resident over on, I think, Lily Lane, which we're still working with the contractor to get them to come back out and address the panels that need to be replaced. So still working through that. I think we've got a commitment to them. We just want to make sure that we get them to mobilize just one time instead of multiple times like we've done over the course. So just trying to make sure we coordinate that effort.
I know we had some citizens come up on some additional areas. Have those been addressed, or are we still working through that?
No, sir. So those the initial requests that were made, we actually have already made those repairs. A bunch of the panels along, I believe that was Plum. A bunch of those panels have been replaced and back in service.
Okay, so we've gotten the complaints that came to council. We've got that corrected. It's just this last remaining one we're working through right now.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then also on Wesley, I know we had a lot of folks inquiring and asking questions. Have we gotten those addressed and taken care of as well?
But, on the drainage piece of it, and then maybe after we address the drainage piece of it, we can kind of give a quick update on where we are on the road
Yes, I know the road will come behind it, but I mean, I know going through that because I had quite a few reach out to me asking about, hey, the drainage, and it's one of those.
Correct. So I know
kind of thing. You go one way or you go the other, and it creates this or that. But
right. I know those came in probably 3-4 weeks ago or so. Do you have update on those?
Last update I got was we were looking at those locations as part of the 1-year walkthrough, which was done maybe about 4 weeks ago. So I'll double check with the team and we can follow back up with you to see what we found.
Okay, because I know we've had some rain since then, and that, kind of what it needs to happen to be able to understand where we're at with that. So appreciate that. And then one last thing on I know Trent and I spoke over the weekend on the street projects. Could we get that updated? It doesn't have a page number here, but the FY 25-29 street projects with the asterisks on it, so that we've got that just for.
Yes. So go to that slide. What's got the streets on there? We did update those.
Yeah, I saw it on the presentation here. I saw y'all updated it. But if we could just get that in an email, just so that I've got it.
Okay. You just want the updated presentation?
Yeah, with
Yes, sir.
with the asterisks on there, so
Yes.
I can look at which roads,
Absolutely.
I mean, the majority of them.
We'll
are
get all the
funded.
pages numbered as well.
Yeah, well, that's what, at the beginning, it started out being numbered, but it dropped off somewhere, so. So, at any rate, all right, thank you, Mayor.
Very good. One thing to note, we mentioned Willowcrest and some of the rework on some of that. Has staff been able to get out during the most recent rains and just kind of observe? I mean, I haven't heard any complaints. I've heard everything has been great over there as far as water's flowing.
Which particular subject?
Willowcrest.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We've had some good rain activity recently to be able to test it and look at it.
Yes, I believe the results have been dramatically different than what folks saw out there in the past. So any other comments you've heard or seen?
No, that Willowcrest is along my route coming in to and from work. So anytime it rains, I'm peeking down all of the side streets. And it's honestly, from what I can tell, has performed well. I think there's a little bit of ponding here and there, but that's to be expected. But overall, it looks fine.
I think when we've talked to folks that live in that neighborhood, it's dramatically different than what they experienced previously.
It looks great. Open up for questions, comments. Go ahead. Anybody else? Lainey?
I just had one observation that some of the slides aren't totaled. Is there? It would be easier if they were totaled. Also, Rachel.
So like the previous slide, you're talking about the totals on the columns?
Yeah, the column.
So this slide goes with the next slide. So they all total up to those bottom columns. Oh, sorry.
I don't think
It
so.
doesn't look like that last one has a total. This one's the funding sources, the other one's the actual projects.
We dropped off the projects that had to-date funding to just show the future projects. So we'll total those in the future for you. I'm sorry.
Carbone?
Thanks, Mayor. I'm back on slide 9. I think of all the CIP projects completed in 24, only one has a O&M impact. Is that right? Because if you toggle back to slide 8, there's some major projects on there that have been completed. And
That's additional O&M impact in fiscal year 25. The animal shelter has been up and running for at least a year, so that's already been incorporated into our budget, and similar things for the public safety training facility. That building has been operational. And so many of those costs included in the park equipment recapitalization are also ongoing parks maintenance costs, so it's not additional O&M at this time.
all right. And when will we see the full CIP with the I guess the support behind all this? Because this is, I mean, it's a good summary presentation, but there's so much work behind the scenes. When do we get to see that so we can look at individual project level and timing and notes and such?
So I think, we'll take the input from this, and then that's kind of one of the next phases. But maybe Rachel, can you give us a timeline on?
We'll
on that?
either submit it with the adoption in September, or we'll include it in one of the budget workshops in August, probably the form later. There'll be a budget workshop in August in which we incorporate the full CIP.
And we'll do a little bit of probably sharing of how that looks in the budget workshops, because working through ClearGov, our new budget software, the CIP is going to look different than it has in the past. So we'll probably do a little bit of walkthrough on how that looks and how to find the information you need as you work through that process.
Okay. 'Cause I appreciate the slide with the introduction where you say the push-pull happens here to affect future debt service, but until we can see the details of those projects, it's hard to sit up here and say, hey, let's push this one back or pull this one forward.
Sure. And I think the other place to take a look at those is in the current CIP, because I don't think there's any real new stuff that's been added in fiscal year 25. So most of those have just moved forward. There's a handful of things, not to mix things up, but there's a handful of things in the water sewer side we've pushed back. For the most part, everything's just moved forward as planned in the past years.
Okay. And then I guess last, it's a fairly robust CIP project. How are we doing from a staffing standpoint to get the projects on the ground?
So I'll hand that over to Lorenzo. Maybe he can introduce his new assistant director over capital projects. And while it is a big program, and we've struggled a little bit with having all of our positions filled the past year. I think if we need to employ some staff extensions, we'll look at those. But if we start getting to where we need to, some projects need to slide or push, we can let the council know on those as well. But I'll let Lorenzo maybe answer that in more detail and introduce his new assistant director.
Yes, sir. So right now, we have a few vacancies in capital projects. We have really a total of 7 project manager positions. And so we got Ms. Fabiola De Carvalho. She's a new assistant director of capital projects. She started with us about a month ago. Is that right? You started about a month ago? Yep. So just about a month ago. So still fresh, still new into it, still learning the team, but trying to help her build a team back so that we can get fully staffed. I'll tell you right now, from a workload perspective, we probably are somewhere around 15 projects per person, just because we have so many vacancies right now. And as you guys can see, kind of that keeps expanding and growing. So as Trent touched on, at some point, we will likely need some additional, whether that's staff augmentation or additional resources in-house. But there is a need because some of these projects get to be very complex. And just the sheer workload of 10 plus projects per project manager gets to be really excessive.
So we'll also be looking at in the budget, whether or not we propose to add any personnel for that group as well as we work through this high level of projects we have going on right now.
Thank you.
Real quick, just go to slide 13. So 13 and 14 are related, and I want to highlight something here because when we go through, this is really for anybody that's listening or watching online as well. When we go through a rate analysis, a tax rate analysis, especially with like a bond program and those types of things, we future forecast very conservatively. As you can see here, assessment valuation growth, 23 and 24 kind of actuals, and then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so, which is super conservative as a dropping, if you will, growth rate there, which produced, almost 3 cents increase would be needed. And that's kind of what we talked about with voters and other things, is that's where we would be. But then you go to slide 14 and then you start plugging in kind of the actuals, and then moving that 5 down, you go 8 and then moving that 5 and then 5, 4, 3, 2, you can see, no change in the rate impact for the debt service. So, when we future forecast our debt load and our projects, we do it ultra conservative and looking at the numbers. So I just wanted to stop and highlight, because these 2 slides highlight that very well. We are cognizant that there is a tax rate associated with debt service, but at the same time, we want to manage this as effectively as we can. At the same time, get as much on the ground and infrastructure-wise to help with the quality of life here in the city. So we'll continue on. Any questions, comments?
I appreciate those comments, Mayor. Maybe just to point out that 8% there, that's an estimate at this point, right?
I know we're getting close.
8%, but I think it's a good estimate at this point. And then maybe we could just, because there's a big difference. There's almost 4 cents from what we were projecting a year ago and where we are today. And, that has to do with changing those growth assumptions as we move forward. It has to do with where we are on some of the projects and how much debt we actually are selling right now as part of this fiscal year versus what was projected. We always project if all the projects move forward as fast as they should and can, then we'll sell this much debt. Well, then when you get into the realities of projects and the difficulties in getting through permitting and different things, and projects slow down and you sell a little less debt, so that brings that number down. And then maybe Rachel, you can walk us through just briefly. This is also impacted by those MUD rebates, correct?
That's correct. So with the reduction in MUD rebates they will have to pay, this is included. There's the potential for this to move lower as a result of recognizing the MUD rebates received this year, but we won't know that until we receive our property tax numbers in July.
So this could further go down a little bit more,
No promise.
Potentially.
potentially. Yeah.
No promises.
Potentially could, may, no, shall. I got it. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Byram?
Thank you, Mayor. Clarity for me is a little marginally overwhelming amount of data, so bear with me a little bit. If I'm understanding this correctly, our current tax rate is on 13 at 0.3329, and we're slated to go to projected 0.3229.
So,
Is that correct?
so maybe a little bit of clarification there. So the tax rate we had budgeted for in FY 24 was the 0.3329. The rate that was actually adopted was 0.3229. That's that 1 penny between the operating fund and the debt service fund. So what it actually is for 24 is the 0.3229. And then that's what the projection is for the next 3 years as well.
Okay. And then, thank you. And this, looking at slide 15 where we list out the future debt, that slide is showing additional debt that we are planning on issuing either through bond or CO in the coming year, and we can service that debt without changing our tax rate?
Yes. So what the forecasted tax rates we saw on the last slide assume this is what we'll be doing over the next 5 years as far as selling debt, and that's the COs as well as the GOs, permanent improvement bonds.
Okay. And
keep in mind, 15 on here doesn't have the asterisk water and sewer that was in our packet.
correct.
So
We made that change because it was a little bit confusing having the water and sewer stacked up here when we were talking about the general fund, so
Gotcha.
we made that change.
Well, and the crux of my question behind that is, that's granted, 170 of it is water and sewer, so 80 of it, as you emailed me back earlier, is just on the general fund side.
Yes, sir.
We're able to manage an additional $80 million in debt service without changing the tax rate at all. That seems like a lot of debt, and we can absorb it in our tax rate, which I'm great. I don't want to raise the tax rate at any means. I just want to make sure I fully understand that's what we're saying.
That's correct.
Okay.
That projection on the tax rate includes, all of these debt sales.
Okay. And you had mentioned, again, going back to some responses that I got from you this week, and I appreciate that some of the additional debt we're looking at issuing is due to inflationary rates, things costing more than we anticipated, specifically in the area of drainage. So when we're looking at projects costing more that we had bonds issued for, is there any consideration, or is this not the time? It's fair to tell me this isn't the time to have this conversation. I'm okay with that. To say, should we be looking at projects to take off the table instead of adding debt via COs?
So, I think that's, so right now that you're correct in that we've got, of our 2023 bond program drainage projects, or all the projects in there, what the assumption we make when we line out a bond program is we set a schedule. If the project's in the first year of that schedule, we estimate about 5% for inflation for each year. So since we set those budgets, we've had a couple of years where inflation's exceeded that 5% by a significant amount. So the early projects, we may be running a little bit high on the actual cost versus what was estimated at the time. And then I think as we get further into the program, as long as inflation moderates, kind of gets back to what it has been for the last couple of decades, then we will kind of catch up on the back end. So one of the things we've talked about internally is, do we sell COs to make that difference up now, or do we just sell more GOs? And then if on the back end we're still running behind, sell those COs. So we've gone ahead and built that into the model, so you see the impacts on the tax rate for that. And I think you could consider pulling back on some of those projects at the end of that. But I think we sold that bond packages that this package of projects would get done. And drainage projects, changing a scope on a drainage project's a little different than changing a scope on maybe a building project, where you could say, hey, let's shave off a few thousand square feet on a building project. Where a drainage project, you've got to basically complete all the components of that drainage project to make it work. So, I think our recommendation would be to just continue with the projects as scoped and planned, and potentially sell, more GOs up front and save those COs for the tail end to see if the overall program catches up with, the inflation built into the program to pay for all 5 years, catches up with the cost of the projects as inflation moderates. And if we don't quite get there, get sell COs on the tail end.
I appreciate that. I would agree with you. I think I would prefer that approach, because while I agree the voters approved a group of projects, they also approved a budget for those projects. So that's the push-pull Tony was talking about before. So we can address that a little bit later. I would like to see, as we get to the end, I certainly agree and understand you don't want to be halfway through a drainage project and then go, don't grade the rest of that ditch because we ran out of money, right? You don't want to do that. But maybe as we get to the end of that 5-year bond program, if we're looking like we're running out of funds within the program, then we talk about COs.
Sure, and our financial policies around COs, that is one of the uses for COs that council's determined is a proper and good use for COs. So again, we can.
Agreed, and I'll just again share some of my mentality on it. While we're looking at streets being underfunded, just on our maintenance side, things of that nature, lots of upgrades we need to do that we'll be talking about later today, and going into the budget season. I know that everything is fighting for every dollar, right? So that's just something that I'm trying to keep in mind when I look through these things versus issuing COs.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate it. I think, that pretty much covers my questions. I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Lorenzo, real quick, when you're going through your presentation, you mentioned a project that looks like it's going to come in well under, and I failed to hear which project that was.
I believe that was the Hill House Road project.
Okay. That's being funded through COs? Or is that a combo of?
Combo of COs and water and sewer COs.
Sewer? Okay.
Yes, sir. And the GMP for that phase that moves fleet and parks operations out to Hill House, that's scheduled for the July 8th council meeting.
I was just, I didn't get the project name, and so I was just trying to remember where that was, but that's good. That's good work that we've got one actually coming in significantly under. You don't hear that very often. All right, any other questions, comments? Oh, I did have one. ClearGov is the new software for budgeting. Is that correct?
That's correct. Our budget and our capital improvement plan will be created in ClearGov.
Okay, so is that something on our end we will have electronically as we roll forward? How will that look? And
Yes, you'll get electronic copies, and we'll continue to produce a physical copy of the proposed budget for those that desire one. But it's a much more interactive online version, and we'll do a walkthrough with the proposed budget.
That was my next question was, walk through and how that looks for members of the council so we understand, how to use the software, how to read through it and paste through it. I'm certainly okay with going to an electronic copy. I just want to make sure I push the right button and don't shut my computer down. So,
It also gives us, we've been working towards some sort of CIP type dashboard, and it's got some features in it where it makes that process easier that we're looking at. But we still got to combine that with some other data to, I think, provide everything we want to. But we got a group working on that, and Fabiola has actually done that in Bastrop. So, we're looking to kind of model something off that.
and if I remember this software, like you said, the dashboard, it's also going to be something that we can have front facing to the public as well, so they can see how the budget is moving. I know we're probably a ways from that, but once we get it implemented, that's my understanding, we'll have that so the public can see a dashboard on how the budget is doing as well.
That's correct.
Possible. Our 2024 adopted budget was also done in ClearGov, so that's available through our finance page, so you can see kind of what the proposed budget will look like also from a look and feel perspective.
I guess, got another question real quick before we move to water and sewer?
I can come back to it. if
Okay.
I need to.
All right, we'll move on to water and sewer then.
So similar to the general fund, there's several projects in the CIP that are funded this time out of the enterprise fund. So wastewater projects currently in design primarily consist of lift station rehabilitation projects. Many of the lift station projects are developed from recommendations offered within the latest lift station assessment. These projects allow us to rehabilitate critical infrastructure as it approaches or has surpassed its useful life. One of the major wastewater projects that we'll see coming up is the Berry Rose and Longwood water reclamation facilities, which have a total combined budget of approximately $270 million. So you guys will see on your council agenda this evening the guaranteed maximum price for phase one or GMP one for the Berry Rose project. So FY24 projects for water also include quite a few utility relocations associated with the TxDOT's widening of FM 518. There are also a number of waterline replacement projects that'll address or at least provide new infrastructure where we have existing transite pipe. Right now we have about 82 miles of transite pipe remaining in the system, and a number of these projects are intended to replace the transite pipe. Currently in construction, we still have the surface water plant that's getting ready to be wrapped up, some improvements on in the Westminster subdivision, and the Cullen elevated storage tank rehabilitation project. Projects that were completed in FY24 includes a few of the elevated storage tanks, such as McLean and Liberty. We also have SCADA Phase 3, which provides connectivity and communications to several of the water treatment plants throughout the city. And we abandoned one of the pump stations in the Green Tea subdivision. And similar to O&M costs that we talked about on the general fund side, enterprise fund, very minimal O&M costs, and actually we have none allocated for FY24. And same thing, this was like for like, so no additional O&M costs were anticipated because it's just in kind. Projects anticipated to start design in FY25 include the Water Master Plan update and West Oaks Village Water Quality Program, which will allow us to replace water lines and provide some additional fire hydrants and things throughout that subdivision. We'll also have a few lift station rehabilitation projects and 518, again, utility relocations, really associated with the second phase of the 518 corridor widening. Some additional projects to start construction in FY25 include your Veterans 2 Regional Lift Station rehabilitation, wastewater, and then decommissioning of a Wooten Road lift station, and a Riverstone Ranch Regional Lift Station capacity expansion, which will provide additional pumps and a little bit more capacity within that lift station out in the Riverstone subdivision. At this point, I'll transfer the discussion back to Rachel to discuss utility rates.
Thank you. So this chart is a history of rate increases in Pearland from 2008 through last year's adopted budget in 2024, which showed a 14% rate increase. Utility rates are set so that we meet these criteria. We fund the operating costs for the enterprise fund. We pay for the enterprise system's annual debt service. We meet our bond covenant requirements of 1.15, and we then generate enough revenue to maintain a cash reserve of 15% for the operating fund and 25% when combining our operating and debt funds. So the rate preview on the next slide is current as of the week of June 17th, but is only preliminary. It is pending the finalization of the fiscal year 25 budget, and the final water and sewer rates for fiscal year 25 depend on the ending audited fund balance for 23 and the 2024 budget projections in collaboration with the proposed FY25 budget. The enterprise fund is not property tax supported, and ongoing property tax discussions will not impact the enterprise fund rates. Included in the rate forecast are the potential future sales for water and sewer COs to support the capital improvement plan. So the initial multi-year rate projection for the water sewer fund is updated below, and it projects a rate increase of 14% for fiscal year 2025, down from the fiscal year 24 multi-year projection of 17%. This is just an initial forecast, and the final proposed rate will be submitted with the budget on August 7th. Driving Pearland's water and sewer rates are the undertaking for large capital projects such as Berry Rose, Longwood, JHEC, and the surface water treatment plant. We have used debt to finance those projects, and now we must pay back a portion of those projects every year. And the model currently assumes that the debt service will increase from $34.5 million to $38.3 million in fiscal year 25. Projects or debt that we sell in fiscal year 2025 for 2025 CIP projects will begin debt payments in fiscal year 26 and impact the fiscal year 2026 rate for the capital improvement plan. The proposed capital improvement plan for fiscal years 25 to 29 is included on these next slides. Additional funding sources are shown on the next slide, and Berry Rose and Longwood are now driving the difference between the capital costs and the funding sources. As we sell the debt for these projects, it's in line with the construction timeline in order to have the lowest possible impact on the rates. So when it doesn't line up year for year, that's what the difference is. So these are the potential funding sources going forward. It includes a portion of our impact fee debt, which will then be repaid by impact fees, water and sewer certificates of obligation, and some cash going forward. This slide indicates wastewater projects slated to start in fiscal year 25 through 29. So the primary funding source for water and wastewater, again, is the certificates of obligation. COs are utilized due to their lower required reserve ratio and the lower interest rates, and we have additional projects for wastewater and their funding sources here, and then water. Future water projects slated to begin in 2025 or later. And the funding sources include cash and COs. And going forward, if possible, we will be funding smaller projects with cash if it does not impact rates, and other projects may be cash funded as dollars allow. I'll turn it back over to Mr. Epperson.
Back to you, Mayor.
All right, real quick, just I'm gonna get this table on the table real quick. Slide, well, it was 38 in our packet. It was the projections table, real quick. Um, the connection growth 1%. So we have 0.5%. That's the current year. FY24 is the current year, correct? Okay. So is that the connection growth that we're seeing this year, or do we know?
I would have to get back to you on that.
Okay. So what I'm wondering is where we are with connection growth currently, and if 0.5% or the 1% is somewhat accurate.
Where should we be?
Yeah. Or is it very conservative?
Right. And you know, each year when we go through that, we work with community development to look at, you know, platted lots that are ready to be developed and things like that. So we'll evaluate those as we tighten up the model as we move towards the actual, you know, the budget presentation.
So we've approved a few multifamily projects. So, for example, the one that's under construction at 1128 Magnolia, what would that be equivalent to? I mean, it's 300 and some odd.
As far as connections, how would we equate that in the
How does that
model?
equate?
We can, I don't know if Chan can answer that, or we can get back to you on how that works.
I don't necessarily have to know today. I
Well,
want to make sure that our connection growth there is a conservative growth rate, and it's not something that's going to bite us. But also, like a multifamily project, how does that equate to homes? I know there's a single unit is not a single home. I know it's not equivalent, but years ago it was 0.7%. I mean, it was 70% of a single family equivalent. And so if it's somewhere like that, then we've got 400 units coming on.
Yeah.
That's equal to.
Right. So we can, you know, we'll do a follow-up memo after this, and we can provide that information there.
Okay. Throw it open for questions and comments. This is on the water and sewer side. Ms. Mona?
Mayor, if I could, maybe just one thing I wanted to point out as we went through that, you know, we talked, there were several projects in there for the 518 widening water and sewer projects. And so right now, what we'll be proposing in this next budget is, since that is a commercial corridor and a lot of that was originally put in by the PEDC, is that they'll be funding those particular projects. So that takes some of that impact off of the rates as well.
Right. I think that was where we saw a better, more legal and legitimate way for them to help with the water and sewer lift that we've been going on. So
Yes, sir.
it's a little bit better. Just a second. Check.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, he just answered my question.
Okay. All right. Perfect.
Slide 40, will that slide be available in our discussion later on our agenda, our water sewer agenda item?
Will it be available where?
Later in our regular meeting
Tonight?
tonight, yeah. Can we have that available in our regular
I
meeting?
think we can have it available, yes.
Okay. That was my question.
Okay. Questions, comments? Mr. Carbone?
Go to slide 49, I believe. There's the list of wastewater projects. Where's the Berry Rose?
Since Berry Rose and Longwood are already in progress, they're not on this list as they're currently funded projects, and these are all future projects.
Okay. Can you remind us again the size of that project?
Total budget?
Yes, the total budget, it was about $270 million for both projects.
Okay. I guess I say that to put these in perspective. Like, these are damn near rounding errors.
Sure. I think if you look at our funding sources, we do see those bigger numbers when you look at our funding sources here. When you look at water and sewer COs, they're
Yes,
at 85 million and 90 million, or 90 and 46.
that's correct.
Those two years.
Big numbers, and the impact fee debt is also Berry Rose and Longwood for those first couple of years.
Okay. I guess for future presentations, because when I go back to the prior slides, we talk about what's under design or construction. I know we verbally talked about Berry Rose, but I couldn't find it on any of the slides. And so 2 years from now, somebody's going to look through this and try to put all the pieces together. And so somehow if we can just keep that in future presentations, I think that'd be a good idea. That's all I had, Mayor.
So Berry Rose does show up on slide 29 for the ongoing wastewater projects in FY24. It's listed as the Berry Rose WRF expansion.
I think we're
Okay.
just looking to have it added to those kind of spreadsheet type sheets that show all the cost of all the other projects each year.
Thank you.
I want to point out the history of rate increases in Pearland. It's slide 35 here, and I think that's before you changed.
I don't think we touched
There you
on
go.
the line there. Maybe we did. If we, bumped our numbers up according to a CPI index annually, that's what the orange line is.
Yeah, what would be interesting to know, and again, we can't go back and redo, all the way back to 2010, 11, 12, but there's 7 years where we had zero increases, 2 years, 3 years, 5% or less, and yet I'm not exactly sure, Trent, you probably know when we really started some planning on the JHEC and surface water treatment plant. But this goes back and highlights had we done some basic 3% increases or something like that, where instead of zeros here and setting ourselves up financially, even if it's cash or some of these larger projects, we would see less spikes. I know I ran this slide for one of my State of the City addresses, and while yes, we would have had spikes, we wouldn't have had 13 and 14. We would have had less. And I might note, just with members of the public that are here, 22, we took that rate. It was originally proposed as a 9%. We took it down to 5, and we paid for it the next year at 13. It would have been 9 2 years in a row as opposed to 13. So things, they do matter. And so I say all that. We've talked about and we've hinted around it. We've never really discussed it in depth. Not saying that we get in depth here, but just planting it in your mind. Should we have a financial policy that states if we have a year that looks as though we're going to have a 0% increase in water and sewer rates, should we have some CPI index, something to put in there to infrastructure bank, to cash bank, to something, because we know we've got long-term maintenance and other stuff, needs that are going to be there. So it's just highlighting it. How do we do that? Because had we done 3% these years that we did 0, we would still have increases now, but it wouldn't be 13 and 14. They would have been probably single digits. And so
I think next time we look at our financial policies, that's something we're going to propose. We look at so that because even in a year where the model doesn't necessarily drive that we need to make a rate increase, we still have increased costs for personnel. We still have increased costs for chemicals and everything that goes into operating our system. It's just we may not have a large capital cost driving rates that particular year.
And I agree. We had in 19 we didn't know about COVID. 2020, that would have been in October of 2019 that we passed that budget. We didn't know about COVID. So I understand the 0% for 21. We're in the midst of COVID. We're in the midst of some uncertainty there. I'm not disputing current events and how they play in on that. I just want to highlight that for a second, that we've seen a lot of zeros, but then we've known some of these projects have been working for a decade in the making, knowing that they're going to be a big driver of rates. So just want to be wise in the future as we move forward and set up successive, councils for success, and not, a big price tag sitting out there, waiting to explode on them. So any other questions, comments? Mr. Byram?
Can we go to slide 38 with the rates that Mary was or Tony was talking about? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was 40 on yours. Oh, it's 38 in mine. My bad.
They made some corrections.
Yep. In our Thursday packet, I asked a question about increases in our expenses versus increases in our revenue. Response I got back was that increases in revenue should actually help reduce the need for increased water rates. And so, and I guess we'll talk about that later this evening, but I want to bring this up because I know this information goes to the general public, and people have a tendency to panic when they see this and think we're going up 14% year over year over year over year. And this is just a forecast because it doesn't have all the data yet, correct? So there's
That's correct. And thank you for bringing that up. I was going to try to point that out before we closed out. This is a very, it's a preliminary look, and we do have some additional work to do here. Closing out this year, where we are on revenues and expenditures for this year, as well as, the MUD rebates that we talked about on the general fund side, making sure we've got all that built into here, and then again, looking at the connection gross.
and those rates will be set during the budget process later on in this year, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and if you could help me understand this slide a little bit, I know I emailed about it, but I'm still not real clear on it. We have water and sewer charges. Let's just take FY24 for example, 72 million. Total revenue is 74 million. So what is and that's kind of consistent year over year. There's a couple million, anywhere from 2 to 3 million between what we're actually charging and our total revenue. So what's making up the difference there?
So I'll take that, Mayor. The primary driver of that is interest income on investments.
Okay. And then our total expenditures, again, taking FY24, we have a $4,900,000 profit, so to speak, looking at the year. And each year moving forward, it's something. With these projections, is roughly about the same number until you get out to 27, 28. And then it really jumps like 7 million, 14 million, which again are just projections. Is our goal, I know we've spent a lot of money over the last few years running the enterprise fund at a deficit until we've used a lot of our own funds to make up that deficit, and our ratios, that bond coverage ratio and whatnot, is basically as low as it's razor thin. Is that correct?
So yes, we have a requirement to maintain a fund balance. That's part of what's driving this. And as we said earlier, when it comes to setting the rates later through the budget process, you'll be able to determine what you're comfortable about. One of the suggestions I would put to you, if you start accruing cash over and above the fund balance, you could apply that to capital as opposed to raising debt in later years.
Okay.
Usually there's quite a few smaller projects that ideally we'd fund with cash, and traditionally, because of where we've been, we've had to debt fund those. So that's part of what we can potentially do.
So on those required fund balances is what I was getting at. We're basically right there, right? We can't go any lower. We can't run our enterprise fund at a deficit anymore.
That's correct. And these are preliminary. When we get into the actual budget discussion, we've got a much more complicated spreadsheet that'll make everything go cross-eyed. But we'll highlight the important lines on that, which shows where we are on our debt service coverage ratio and where we are on our fund balance percentage. And you'll see that we typically run those down to, right to the edge of those, so we can, moderate the rates as best we can. Okay. But we've got a lot of work to do on this between now and then.
Yeah, and I want to highlight, Clint, that your comment and your highlighting, this slide, at the end of the day, this is threading a needle. And, when you really look at it, I mean, it's a narrow path that you have to go through. And that's what we've been trying to do, because, we're all ratepayers, we're all homeowners. You got business owners here that are paying rates in their businesses as well. And so, we want to keep rates as reasonably low as we can. At the same time, we've got debt coverages and other stuff that we have to get paid. And so I think this also shows and highlights that we're trying to run it. It's truly threading a needle. So I think for the public's sake, when you see this, they'll see it out there. They won't get the commentary. The commentary around it is we are trying to do some massive projects, put them on the table because we have to. I mean, let's talk about, the Berry Rose project. I mean, we have a project, we have a plant in Longwood that's 60 years old, that's in the flood way. So every time Clear Creek goes out of its banks, it's inundating that plant. And so the responsible thing is we've got to do something about it. Besides that, we're not under mandate by EPA, but we're real close. They know we're working on this project. They're giving us time. So if we didn't do this, we would be just like some other, communities around us and others across the country that get the nasty letter, and we got all the press from EPA saying, thou shalt do this and do it tomorrow, or else. And so we're being responsible. We've been doing large capital projects, playing catch up. And so here we are with this side of it. And so we're trying to be responsible. At the same time, it is costly. And, we do have people that tell us, we're pricing people out because of this. At the same time, what would the cost be if we didn't do it? And then all of a sudden are mandated, and you have to do it. This cost isn't going to be $270. It's going to be more because we're going to incentivize somebody to get it done overnight.
These two projects are our single largest expenditure.
Yeah, and this is the largest. These two combined, if you put it as one project, it's the largest project in the history of our city. And so, we don't do this and go through this and take it for granted. I mean, it's weighty and it's heavy and it's big numbers and all of that. But this slide highlights we're really trying to thread a needle. And I'd say projections are only as good as the 3 years. I mean, I like to see the 5 years. I like to see the 7 on the greater spreadsheet, just so you kind of have an idea. But if anybody can forecast anything past the next 2 years, let's go write a book and retire.
In 22, it was 29% and 22%.
That's correct. And
I think maybe one thing to add to that, the unpredictability of it is, and you'll see this tonight when we do budget amendment number 2, is that it's very hard to predict your revenues on water and sewer because they're largely driven year to year by what the weather does. So where last summer we had an extended drought period and people were using a lot of water to keep their yards alive and things like that, that drives revenues up. It drives some of our expenditures up as well on raw water and producing water, but it drives those revenues up, and we see that. But then the way we don't project and we don't estimate future years by that peak year where we have a drought. We again look at what it looks like year to year on the trends. But if this year we continue to have a wet year and a wet year throughout the summer, we will see a significant decrease in revenues by the end of this year. So, that's why we have to look at this year to year as well as plug those numbers into the model and see what type of increase is necessary to sustain the system.
I guess the main crux of my line of questioning was this is really kind of worst case scenario.
I would say yes, especially for FY25 right now. This is worst case scenario, which is 3% better than we projected a year ago. Mm-hmm. And then once we get all the final numbers plugged in, we expect this to come down some additional. But I don't want to oversell it at this point until we get everything put together and we're able to present this to you as part of the budget. But we expect that to come down a little further once we get all those things plugged into it.
All right. Any other questions, comments? Yeah. Oh, Mr. Tooman? Sure. Go ahead. All right. What's next? Well, that was future dates. We're at the end of the workshop. You want to go ahead and ask now, or are you going to ask it at the next meeting? Okay. All right. Good deal. Okay. Back over to you guys.
Rachel's going to cover our future dates associated with the budget.
Yes. So today we had our comprehensive CIP workshop, and this should be the first reading of Budget Amendment 2. And then on August 7th, we'll deliver the proposed budget. Budget discussions 1, 2, and 3 will be in August. Starting September 9th, we'll have the first reading of the budget and the tax rate, as well as the first approval of fee ordinances. And then September 23rd will be the second reading of the budget, tax rate, and fee ordinances, and include our tax rate public hearing.
All right. That concludes our presentation, Mayor. If there's any final questions, we'd be happy to answer those. But looking forward to the budget season, and this is really kind of getting us kicked off for that.
Yeah, it really kind of sets the tone, and looking forward, I guess, so a little over a month away, we'll be getting our budget books. When do we expect, final numbers aren't ever final, I don't think. From the different CADs, how close are we on being able to do our own projections? I guess towards the end of July.
So we get those just a handful of days before we present the budget to you, I think end of July.
I know everything that comes in my name with the CAD name on it, it gets ripped open when it hits the door. I was looking for it, so. Which is okay. All right. Was that, does that end everything on you guys?
Yes, sir.
All right, good deal. Looks like we got done with a little bit of time with, I saw dinner come through the front door here a few minutes ago, so they'll be getting set up. So we'll go ahead and call for adjournment on this special meeting. We'll be back in place for our 6:30 meeting here shortly. It is 5:06.